Hello and welcome back to NonCompete. I'm American Johnson. This is Quick Rise. There's some really interesting and actually pretty approachable theory from Dr. Judith Butler. She's one of the few philosophers out there who writes in a way that is very easy to understand, I think. And she's got some great videos on gender performance and the theater of gender. I'll just go ahead and throw a link to that, a good interview with Judith Butler talking about some of these ideas in the description. I've talked about it before on the channel, but basically the idea is that gender is a social construct. So here's another nice big fancy word for you: phenomenology. Phenomenology is the study of the structures of human thought and consciousness and behavior. So Judith Butler has this phenomenological idea about the social and psychological structures of gender. And the metaphor that Judith Butler uses when discussing gender is that basically we are performing our gender roles, and that we have roles that are assigned to us by society. So if you're like assigned male at birth, society expects you in this heteronormative patriarchal society to perform the role of a man, right? And so then that's where LGBTQ plus people find their oppression, because they don't necessarily feel comfortable performing that assigned role. They might want to perform another role. Another role might make them more happy. And so then that tension is where all of the oppression of gender oppression comes from. And it's not just LGBTQ plus people. Of course, obviously, women also suffer oppression, and they suffer because of the gender roles that they have to fulfill. And men also suffer because of our gender roles that we're supposed to fulfill. And I have a video that I did about that. I'll put a link to that in the description as well. But basically, I'm just going to take Judith Butler's ideas about performance, and I'm going to overlay them onto the ideas of capitalism and the class structure of capitalism in the society we live in, because I think they fit quite nicely and they make some of this theory a little bit easier to grasp. So we're going to be using the metaphor of theater and performance to talk about some of these theoretical ideas, and that can hopefully make it easier for us to understand, maybe. So how is capitalist society a theater? How do we perform in this capitalist society? I think the easiest example to use, and probably the most important example, would be the workplace. So when you go to work, when we go to work, everybody has a certain role that they're expected to play. And those roles can be basically broken down into two broad categories. So you have the employer category and the employee category. And so the boss, when the boss comes to work, the boss has to play a certain role and fulfill certain expectations. And some of those are come from within, so they're like self-motivated. So the boss wants to feel powerful, wants to feel like a boss. That's a big reason people get into bossing, because they want to have that fulfillment and the pleasure that comes with playing that role. And then if you're an employee, you also are expected to fulfill a certain role of your own. And that depends a lot, on your particular field or your particular level within the organization that you work in. But, you can't, if you are an employee and you go into work and you try to play the role of the boss, you're going to have problems. That's going to create problems for you. There is a role that you are expected to play. If you try to transgress that role, then you will have difficulties in your workplace. Okay, so that's the most basic idea of the performance aspect of capitalism. So now let's talk a little bit about affectation. So affectations, in my mind, there are a few different definitions with different philosophers for affectation, but essentially affectation is, I like to think of it as a specific structural instance or a structure of a performance. So, if you're talking about with gender performance, women might affect their female gender role by wearing makeup or wearing a dress. That would be an affectation of the gender role that is assigned to women. They are things that women will do or wear or participate in to fulfill or enhance the playing of that role. And so for a man, that might be a suit and tie or a beard or something like that, and of course you can transgress those gender roles and you can adopt the affectation of a gender that was not assigned to you by society. And Judith Butler gets into that. There's a lot of really interesting stuff on that, but that's going to be on the scope of this. But basically, so that's the idea of an affectation as applied to gender. But we also have affectations within our workplaces under capitalism. So a boss's affectations might be props or mannerisms or clothing, all kinds of stuff that helps the boss play that role, that helps the boss in their performance of the role of the boss. So, some easy examples would be like the big corner office, the big mahogany desk, the big tall back chair, driving the sports car to work and parking it, in the special CEO parking space. Those are all affectations that help the boss play the role and feel comfortable in that role as the boss and project that role to the rest of the workplace. And we as workers also have affectations imposed upon us that we are expected to fulfill and play, whether it's the cubicle that we have to sit in if we work in a dreary office job, or whether it's a dress code. You're expected to wear certain clothing, not wear other clothing. You might have to have certain haircuts, can't have certain piercings. Those are all affectations that are imposed upon us. And then the mannerisms that we use, especially when we engage with the boss. Yes, sir, no, ma'am. You have to be very respectful and polite to the boss in a way that you wouldn't be expected to be respectful and polite to your coworkers. So there's this whole ecosystem in every workplace with roles that we're expected to perform and affectations that enhance those performances. Make sense? Okay. So just to make this very clear, there's nothing good or bad about the, having an affectation. We all have affectations. And some of them are harmful and some of them are beneficial. Some of them are neutral. But the important thing is to be conscious of these affectations. Affectations are problematic when they are imposed upon somebody, through coercion, non-voluntarily, when there's no consent involved to being forced into an affectation. That's a problem. Or if those affectations harm other people, obviously that would be a problem as well. And so, if a man decides to have a beard like I do, this is an affectation that I've decided to adopt. There's nothing right or wrong about that. I feel perfectly comfortable with it. If you don't like my beard, that's fine. It's my choice to have this affectation. Now, problems arise whenever there's a friction or a lack of agency in which affectations we have with the world. And so, as an example, if I decided that I look pretty in dresses and I want to wear dresses, and society tells me that I can't, right? That harms me because I don't have agency over my own performance and my own affectations, right? So society is basically imposing an oppressive set of expectations about which affectations I adopt, right? It's pretty simple concept. Now, there are also affectations that are, harmful. So for instance, if I wanted to wear a shirt that has, like a racial slur or a homophobic slur or something on that, that is, harmful and hostile and violent in its own way towards these, vulnerable groups of people. And, that's probably a bad affectation. It's an affectation that is harmful or damaging to other people. So the whole point of talking about affectations and performance is just to be mindful of them and to start, analyzing the way affectations occur around us and the way that we are affecting and performing ourselves. If you really think about the environment of a workplace, it is so freaking weird. It's a weird place where we all act very strangely. It's so uncomfortable. There are some people who really love, like for instance, I've worked with people in offices and they seem to genuinely love that like corporate business speak, that affected language where they're, speaking with all the corporate buzzwords, and they really love going to meetings. There are some people like that, and that's great if they like that environment. If that's how they want to present themselves and live their lives, that's great. But most of us don't want to live like that. And most of us don't want to kiss our bosses' asses. And most of us don't want to wear the suit and tie. It's this weird, strange theater that we have to participate in for our very livelihood. And how strange is it that, you can't buy food, you can't feed yourself, you can't get healthcare unless you play this role every day, 40 plus hours per week. It's very, very strange. It's a very absurd kind of imposition on humanity. It's a crucial aspect of capitalist oppression, is the fact that we have to pretend that we're somebody who we're not for most of our waking lives. Now, some people, have the privilege that they might have a job where they can just kind of be themselves. And some people will actually, and I've done this before, I've taken pay cuts. I've accepted less money so that I could have more freedom to be myself and play the role that I naturally, inherently, innately want to play. And I know a lot of people who do this kind of stuff. Like there are people who work at home as freelancers, or they'll work a night shift or something like that, and they'll take less pay and have, real material detrimental impact on their lives, just so that they don't have a boss breathing down their neck all the time, just so that they don't have to wear the suit and tie, just so that they can have the tattoos that they want to have, so that they can dye their hair. It's so important to us as human beings to be who we feel we truly are inside, that we're willing to take massive hits to our wallets, which means massive hits to our material security and comfort, just so that we can have just so we can play the roles that we feel comfortable playing. And this whole concept of performance and affectation, it can be used to analyze every aspect of society, and it can be used to shed light on all these different aspects of oppression that we suffer every day of our lives. So there are racial components of performance, right? I know in the Deep South where I'm from, there's definitely like certain roles that traditionally, whites have expected Black people and people of color to play in the South. It wasn't that long ago that we had segregation. It wasn't that long ago where Black people were expected to call white people sir, ma'am, show them an extra amount of respect that was imposed upon them. When I was recording this, I accidentally made it sound like this is a thing of the past, but this definitely does still go on, and people of color are still expected to perform these kinds of roles and affectations in today's society, so I just wanted to make that clear. There's racial imposition of role performance. There is, of course, the gender that we've already discussed. There's class performance, right? There are people, have you ever met somebody who doesn't like it when, waiters act in certain ways? They have an expectation for how a waiter acts, or for how somebody they perceive as like a servant acts. I've been an Uber driver before, and, I've gotten like lower reviews on my ratings because I didn't perform the role of an Uber driver the way that the passenger expected me to. So like I've gotten like 2-3-star reviews when I was an Uber driver because I talked too much, or I wasn't friendly enough, or whatever. I didn't perform the role of an Uber driver up to their expectations. And those negative reviews have real impact on my livelihood as an Uber driver. So this is all very, very crucial, important stuff that we need to be thoughtful about. And we are not immune to it on the left. There is obviously a great deal of affectation and role performance that we're expected to play on the left, and some of it's imposed upon us, and some of it, we choose to adopt ourselves. But we have to be thoughtful about that, and we have to, be very conscious about the affectations of the left, and we have to be careful about which affectations invade our spaces and which affectations we might inadvertently be imposing on other people. I definitely have seen situations where leftists who are people of color are expected to perform certain roles, and like Angie Speaks and Black Red Guard have talked about this before, about how when white people go into leftist spaces with people of color, they have certain expectations on the role that person of color is supposed to perform. And generally speaking, this is a problem where white leftists want, for instance, Black leftists or, other people of color to act a certain way, to be very, it's very much like what I was talking about with my grandpa's era of the South in the United States of America, where, if Black people are too aggressive, or in the minds of the white leftists, if Black people act too aggressive, or if they don't, if they're not a perfect, I guess, token example of a person of color in a leftist space, then they get a lot of flack for that. And I've seen it happen myself in leftist spaces, and it's always ugly when that happens, and we need to be really aware of it. We're not immune to it on the left, is the point that I'm trying to make. We have theater and performance on the left, and we need to be aware of it. Now, some of that's not so bad, like some of it, like think about it this way. Affectation is perfectly fine if it's making us feel more comfortable or happier or more productive or relaxed or whatever without hurting anybody else. So a good example would be, if you want to really relax, you might go put on a nice soft bathrobe, You might lay down in your hammock. You might get a nice cold drink and put an umbrella in it. And you might want to build this atmosphere of relaxation, play some soft music in your ears. That stuff is fine. It's good. And it's exactly the kind of performance and affectation that's very healthy, because it puts us into this mind space where, okay, I'm here to relax. I have all of these props around me. They're going to put me in the right mindset to relax. Those are good affectations. And we have good affectations on the left. We have like symbols that we use, like the black red flag of anarchism, or, the anarchist logo with the A in the circle, those kinds of things, those symbols. I have a tattoo. I have this leftist tattoo, which is a quote by Ho Chi Minh. And that is definitely an affectation. It's a leftist affectation where, whenever I see this quote on my arm in the mirror or something like that, it reminds me of this quote by Ho Chi Minh, which is translated to, there's nothing more precious than freedom and independence, right? So those are like inspiring words. I put them on my body so that every time I look in the mirror, I can be reminded of those words. That's an affectation, and it helps me keep the mindset of those words that I find valuable. So there's nothing wrong with having affectations in and of themselves, but we have to be really careful that we're not imposing affectations and roles oppressively onto other people, and B, that we're not accidentally affecting in ways that are harmful to ourselves. And now sometimes we don't have a lot of choice of that. Like in the workplace, we have to impose these affectations on ourselves so that we don't get fired, or so that we can get a raise, or so that we can, be materially more secure. But we should at least be conscious of that, and we should be raising awareness with our coworkers and with our fellow oppressed people of the world that this is happening. We spend so much time in capitalist society playing these roles and putting on these affectations that it starts to feel normal. And it's not normal. It's not normal that there are other people who are telling you, an adult human being, how to dress and how to talk. Now, of course, there are, manners and rules of politeness that are perhaps beneficial to society. So like, for instance, covering your nose when you sneeze, that's an affectation that has very pragmatic, and this is the way you're supposed to do it, by the way, nowadays. It's the vampire cloak. That's how you're supposed to cover your mouth when you sneeze these days, or cough. So I don't want to see you doing this. That's the wrong affectation. This is the affectation that I would like to impose upon you when you sneeze or cough. It spreads fewer germs. So it's a very pragmatic affectation. And there are other affectations that are beneficial to society. It's not such a bad thing to say, I'm sorry if you accidentally bump into somebody, or to say, excuse me if you're going to, kind of walk past somebody and take up their space or whatever. Those are fine, perfectly functional, pragmatic, beneficial affectations. But we have to be always ever thoughtful and conscious about which affectations are serving a purpose and beneficial, and which ones are oppressive or imposed upon us or just unnecessary. And I guess the final thought I have about this whole topic of performance and affectation is that as an anarchist, as a leftist, the future I want to see is the future where we are all more comfortable to play the roles that we feel the most comfortable playing, where there is as little imposition of role performance on human beings as possible. We should all be, able to follow our own rhythm through life and affect ourselves as we feel comfortable, wear the clothes we want to wear, do the things we want to do, as long as it doesn't hurt other people, and as long as we are all supporting each other in accordance with the principles of free association and mutual aid. And that's all I've got to say for now. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic. I'll leave them down below. If you haven't subscribed already, do it and click that bell. I'm American Johnson. This is NonCompete. We'll see you next time.
Give your family the foundation of a complete diet with enriched
communism.